of creating highly original novel ideas. And you can do that whether you're just learning how to write stand-up comedy or whether you're a veteran comedian. There's a lot of great creativity researchers out there that have shown that creativity can be increased. So whatever level of creativity that you already have, you can take that to a whole new level. But in order to do that, you really need actionable steps. One reason that people think that creativity is, you're either born with it or you're not, is because creativity in itself is not something that is actionable. If I told you to start being creative, you wouldn't know exactly what to do. You might want to sit down and start writing, but that in itself, that's not being creative. That's just trying to put yourself in a situation to start becoming creative. So learning these steps of creativity is instrumental in being able to take control of the creative process so that you're no longer waiting for a creative idea to come to you. You can actually go out and you can pursue these ideas. You can also increase the originality of the ideas, which I talk a lot about in the Creativity for Comedians program. And in this video blog, I'm going to be talking about some of the very basic concepts that I talk about in the main program. And obviously the program's over 6 hours long. I can't get into it in depth here, but I do want to give you a rundown of these steps just so you can see how important this information is as far as being able to start taking control of your own creative process as a comedian. So what the 6 steps are, they're broken down into, the first part is in the preparation stage, and that can be broken down into 2 separate steps in itself, and I call it one step. The first step is in observation, and every stand-up comedy class, every comedy school talks about the ability to observe, but they do it only on a surface level. Observation, obviously, it needs to be the beginning point of your writing, and it happens well before the actual writing takes place. Usually it happens when you're out on the street, when you're doing something else entirely different, and then you have an observation. You go say, that's perfect for what I'm trying to do, and you take it back. But what's generally not talked about in these comedy classes is that you need to be able to bounce between a low and a high threshold of observation. And what that means is that first off, you want to have a low threshold of observation, and we want that because we want as many ideas flowing into us as possible, because that gives us more to work with as comedians. You don't want to just talk, you wouldn't just talk about relationships on stage. You want lots of different areas that you can explore, and it's the same way with observation. We want to be able to observe things everywhere rather than just in certain locations. So what a low threshold does for you is it lowers the stimulus that is required in order for you to consciously become aware of something that you want to write down. So for some people, they're going to be having a higher level of a higher threshold, and what's going to happen because of that is that they're not going to end up with nearly as many observations and nearly as many things to work with as they could otherwise. But equally important is that we're able to shift from that low threshold into a high threshold. And the reason we want to do that is because if you have a very low threshold for a while, then you're going to want to work with the components that you've already acquired. And you can't do that if ideas are always flowing in you. Eventually you have to shut off the flow and then start creating ideas with what you have. And what a high threshold does is it gives us the ability to seclude ourselves for a while and actually start working with the components that we have. So one part about being creative and that creative personality is the ability to shift from high to low thresholds. And that's really important as far as with the low threshold, it gives you that ability to gain all that knowledge, and then with the high threshold, it gives you the ability to work with it. And neither one is good without the other. So you have to be able to shift between both of them, and that's something that you can consciously control. This is not something that you have to wait for in order to start creating. You can actively lower your threshold, and then you can actively raise it by secluding yourself later on. So that's the observation the observation stage. And then right after your observation is abstraction. And what abstraction is that when we get that observation, we want to get it down to its bare essentials. We want to take this gigantic observation that may happen in a circumstance that is not related to something that we can actually use in comedy, but we want to get it into a usable component. So what we do is we strip the idea of everything except for the bare essentials. That's the most important thing to writing your joke, to performing, whatever the case might be. So we abstract all those ideas to get them down in those usable components. And then the third stage of the creative process is where we actually go, or the second stage, if we're doing it the way I'm doing it in this video. The second stage is going to be in actually synthesizing those ideas. So what happens now is we've observed everything, and we've abstracted ideas, and after a while we're going to have a stockpile of material that we can use. Whether we've actually put it into jokes yet or not doesn't really matter. It's just ideas that we could eventually use. And in the synthesis stage, what we do is we take all those ideas and we start combining them together to form something new. Because the way the brain is structured, it works by association. Neurons are connected to other neurons. That's the only way the brain works. And because of the way the brain is wired, it is unable to create something out of nothing, because it has to first be able to associate one thing with another. So when we're creating, we're not actually creating something out of nothing. We're creating new ideas out of old ideas. And that's what we're doing in the observation and abstraction part of that first stage. So we're synthesizing all of these ideas together, but we're also, interestingly enough, we're synthesizing our current observations with past skills and knowledge of stand-up comedy. So if you've taken a stand-up comedy class, they've taught you about how to structure a punchline or characteristics of a good setup line. And what you're actually doing is you're combining that past knowledge and the past knowledge of your actual implementation as you've done it in the past. You're combining all of that with the new information and with the new observations and abstractions, and you're putting it all together to form a new joke, to form a new performance style, whatever the case might be. And this works whether you're talking about creativity in stand-up comedy, whether you're talking about innovations like physical products, paintings, scientific research. It doesn't matter. So that is the synthesis part of the creative process. And after we synthesize, the next step is that we want to have that creative insight. So this is pretty straightforward when we're talking about consciously going through the creative process. If you consciously put a bunch of ideas together, then you instantly have that creative insight, that awareness of the idea, because you just put it together. However, a lot of the time, that insight originates from the subconscious brain. And when that happens, there's a lot of tools and strategies that you can use to really tease those ideas out so that you're having more of those creative insights that seem to come out of nowhere. If you've ever been writing and the perfect joke just popped into your head, it's not because you systematically worked through all of those ideas. It's because you were consciously working on the problem, but you were subconsciously working on it as well. And when your subconscious figures out the answer to a problem, it attempts to communicate that to you. And depending on what you're actually doing at the time, sometimes that communication is lost, sometimes you have it. One of my favorite ways of having a creative insight is what's called semi-automatic activity. And what semi-automatic activity is, it's anything that it's something that's easy for your conscious brain to do. Things like going for a run, or going swimming. Generally, exercising is great. Driving is fantastic. If you ever had creative ideas while you're driving, it's because the driving is a semi-automatic activity. It's an activity that is so easy for you to do that it requires very little conscious effort, and you can kind of check out while you're driving. But at the same time, it moves your conscious brain out of the way. It stops creating so much noise, and it allows your subconscious to all of a sudden bubble up and have that and communicate that idea that it already had in the past. And if you've taken any kind of stand-up comedy class or gone to a comedy school, they've taught you that you need to have a notepad with you at all times because a creative insight could happen at any point. And this is exactly why that's the case, because when you're doing something else, your conscious brain is moved slightly out of the way, and it makes room for your subconscious to pop up and communicate an answer to you. And I talk a lot more about that in the actual Creativity for Comedians program, about the actual science of it and how to manipulate it even more. But those are the first steps, and I'm going to go ahead and make another video for the next steps.